When my father took me to that dark house at 15, he said, "This will cure your laziness." The next day, he burned my blood-stained sheets. It was just the first of 5 abortions that destroyed my dream of becoming a mother. Hello, my dears. What a blessing to be here talking with you today. My name is Mary Elizabeth Williams. I'm 73 years old and have lived quite a life. I was born in a small town in Mississippi, but today I live here in Bakersfield, California. It's a beautiful city, you know, with so much history, but I ended up here through a different path that I'll share with you. These days, I spend my time making quilts and crochet pieces that I sell at the local craft fair. I discovered this talent late in life. It wasn't until after 60 that I found this gift in my hands. Before that, I worked for many years as a seamstress, doing alterations and repairs, but quilting and crochet came to me as a gift from God in my old age. Each stitch I make feels like I'm sewing together pieces of my story too. Here in my living room, where I'm recording with the help of my great-niece Taylor, I have all my threads neatly organized by color. Look at all these beautiful colors. This rug under my feet? I made it myself. Took me almost 3 months. And this pillow embroidered with wildflowers too. All made with these calloused hands that have seen everything in this life. But before I continue, my dears, if you like what you're seeing, hit that subscribe button down there. Taylor explained that it's important so more people can hear my stories. And also tap that bell to know when there's a new video. This technology is something else, isn't it? In my day, we barely had a radio at home, and now look at me, talking to people all across America. And you, my friends my age who are watching, comment below which city you're watching from and what your children's names are. I'd love to know. Because, you know, my dears, not everything in life was easy. Today, I see so many young women studying, following their dreams. But in my time, everything was so different. And in my house, things were even more different than in other homes. When I look back, I see that my childhood was marked by something that nobody really understood back then. A pressure so great that it ended up crushing my dreams like a ripe fruit falling to the ground before its time. I was born in 1952, in a time when girls had to learn to cook, sew, and keep house. But in our home, things were different, in a way that ended up hurting me deeply. My father and mother had ideas that didn't fit with the rest of the small town where we lived. And this, my dears, was just the beginning of a painful story that I carry with me to this day. I remember as if it were yesterday the smell of wood in the house where I was born. A simple house, painted white with blue trim, with windows that creaked when the strong Mississippi wind blew. It was there that I began to understand that my life wouldn't be like the other girls in the neighborhood. My father, Gerald Williams, was a tall, thin man with tan skin and restless eyes that always seemed to be looking for something on the horizon. He worked as a public servant at the small post office in town. My mother, Dorothy Williams, was a primary school teacher, a small woman but with a strong personality, with black hair always tied in a tight bun. They met at a 4th of July celebration, people said, and they married quickly after only 3 months of dating. She was 19 and he was 26. There were 4 of us siblings, me, the oldest, born in 1952. Then came my brother Joshua, 2 years younger, Eunice, born in 1956, and the youngest Arnold, from 1958. Our house was that white and blue one I mentioned, with a porch in front where we played on hot afternoons. It had 3 small bedrooms, one for my parents, one for the boys, and another for us girls. The kitchen was the heart of the home, with a wood stove that made everything smell like sweet wood smoke and an old radio on the shelf that played music when the signal was good. Life in our small Mississippi town in the 1950s was very different from today. The town revolved around the church, the school, and the cotton fields. We children loved the summer months because the whole town would come alive with Independence Day celebrations and county fairs. Our routine was simple, but very rigid. We woke up at 5:30 a.m. every day. My mother made oatmeal or grits for breakfast. Sometimes there was bread from the only bakery in town. After that, everyone had their chores. The boys helped fetch water and firewood, while we girls took care of tidying the house. At 7 o'clock, we went to school. My siblings and I studied at the same school where my mother taught. But unlike most girls my age, when I came back from school around 11 o'clock, I didn't just have household chores to do. My father and mother were different from the other parents in town. While in other homes girls learned to cook, sew, and keep house, in mine, education came first. Mary has to be somebody in life, my father would say, pounding his finger on the wooden table. I didn't raise a daughter to be any man's housewife. At first, this seemed good. While my little friends had to help their mothers all day, I had set times for studying. Daddy would bring books from Atlanta when he went to handle post office business and made me read all of them, even the ones I didn't really understand. Mama, being a teacher, would correct my notebooks with a red pen, marking each mistake with a big circle that made me feel ashamed. A girl who doesn't study becomes a man's slave, my father would repeat almost every day during dinner. And my mother would add, "The only way out for a woman in this world is education, Mary. Otherwise, you'll end up like me, teaching ill-mannered children and washing a man's clothes until you die." I remember that at 8 years old, while the other girls played with dolls, my father would have me read aloud the news from the newspaper, which arrived weeks late in our small town. If I stumbled over any word, he would bang on the table and make me repeat it until it came out perfect. There was no room for error. "I don't want a stupid daughter," he would say. Being a girl in this world is bad enough. And so, between books, notebooks, and demands, my childhood passed by. My friends grew distant because I never had time to play. The jump rope games, the hopscotch on dirt roads, all of this was replaced by hours of forced study, memorizing the names of rivers, state capitals, and mathematical formulas that I didn't even understand properly. While most families of the era followed the traditional pattern, boys studied to work outside the home and girls learned domestic duties, my parents did the opposite. They demanded more from me and my sister Eunice than from the boys. Joshua and Arnold had freedom to play after their chores. They could fish in the creek, play ball in the street. Meanwhile, we girls were kept inside studying. This was very strange for that time, you know? We're talking about the 1950s, when in common American families, you didn't see this pressure for girls to study. In the 1950s, girls' education was still primarily geared toward being good wives and mothers. Most of my classmates learned to embroider, cook, and keep house while I was memorizing multiplication tables or reading books advanced for my age. Don't get me wrong. Today I know education is important, but back then, the way my parents pressured me was cruel. "You have to be top of the class, otherwise what's the point?" my father would say, comparing my grades with those of other students. My mother, who I hoped would defend me, only reinforced it. "Your daughter got a B? Why not an A? What's missing?" That pressure began to affect me. Sometimes I would hide behind the house to cry because no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. My small mistakes were pointed out as major failures. If my notebook wasn't perfectly organized, if a math problem came out wrong, it was cause for endless lectures. It was around this time, when I was about 10, that I began to feel the first signs that something wasn't right with me. I didn't have a name for it yet, but today I know they were the first signs of the depression that would follow me for years. I began to lose interest in everything, even things that used to excite me. I would spend hours looking at the creek through the window, feeling an emptiness that I couldn't explain. My performance at school began to fall, not because I wasn't studying, but because something inside me seemed to have broken. The pressure only increased, of course. "What's happening to you, girl? Are you getting stupid?" my father would shout, without understanding that his own words were pushing me toward an abyss. And so, at 12, I already carried on my shoulders a weight that I couldn't bear. There was no name for this feeling at the time. Depression wasn't something people talked about in a small Mississippi town in the 1960s. It was just laziness, being dramatic or weak, as my father would say. Little did he know that this was just the beginning of a suffering that would mark my life forever and would soon transform into something much worse. When I turned 13 in 1965, things really started to get worse. My body was changing, beginning to become a young woman's. And with that came new demands and concerns from my parents. I remember as if it were yesterday the day I had my first period. Instead of explaining with kindness what was happening, as my friends' mothers did, my mother looked at me seriously and said, "Now you have to be even more careful. A girl who bleeds can get pregnant, and if you get pregnant, your education is over." It was one more responsibility, one more demand. While the other girls were starting to dress up, to talk about the boys in town, I remained tied to books and notebooks. But something inside me had changed. That feeling of emptiness that had begun at 10 was now like a deep well into which I was falling without being able to hold on to anything. My grades, which had always been high, really began to fall. I couldn't concentrate anymore. I would read the same page of a book 5, 6 times and understand nothing. My head seemed filled with a thick fog that wouldn't let my thoughts organize themselves. At night, I would lie awake for hours, looking at the wooden ceiling of our room, unable to sleep. In the morning, it was a struggle to get out of bed. My father wouldn't accept this. For him, I was being difficult, pretending so I wouldn't have to study. "This is just a girl being dramatic and causing trouble," he would say, pounding on the table. The scoldings became more frequent and harsher. If before he yelled, now he screamed so loudly that the neighbors could hear. "You're going to end up useless, a tramp who's good for nothing." The situation at home became unbearable. My mother, who could have defended me, just kept quiet when my father shouted at me. Sometimes she even agreed with him. "Your daughter gets slower every day. Seems like she doesn't want anything out of life," she would say, as if I wasn't right there listening to everything. My siblings noticed what was happening, but they were too young to help me. Joshua, at 11, would sometimes bring me a little piece of candy that he had hidden in his pocket, trying to cheer me up. Eunice, at 9, would sit beside me while I cried in secret, saying nothing, just holding my hand. Little Arnold, at only 7, didn't really understand what was happening, but would hug me tight when he saw me sad. In July 1966, when I was 14, I had my first really serious crisis. It was after receiving grades from school. For the first time, I had gotten a grade below average in math. I knew what awaited me at home. I walked as slowly as possible along the dirt roads of our town, as if I could delay the inevitable. When I arrived, my father was already home, sitting at the kitchen table. My mother must have told him because she was a teacher at the same school. "Show me the report card," he ordered as soon as I walked through the door. With trembling hands, I gave him the paper. He looked at it, his face turning red, and then threw the report card on the floor. "I worked day and night to give you an education, and this is how you thank me, getting a low grade. What do you have in your head, girl? Sawdust?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there, feeling the tears running down my face, and then, for the first time, came the hard slap on the side of my face, which made me stagger backward. "This is to wake you up," he shouted. "Those who don't learn with words, learn with pain." My mother, who was there, just turned her face and went to the bedroom, closing the door. She said nothing, didn't try to defend me. It was at that moment that something inside me completely collapsed. I ran to the backyard, hid behind the laundry tub, and cried until I had no more tears. That night I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just thought about running away, about disappearing. In the following weeks, I tried beyond what was possible to recover my grades. I studied until dawn, eyes burning, head aching, but my body and mind seemed to conspire against me. The more I tried to concentrate, the more my thoughts ran away. I began to have such severe headaches that they kept me in bed for days. I lost my appetite and lost so much weight that my clothes hung loose. "This is all an act," my father insisted. "Depression doesn't exist. What exists is laziness and shamelessness." He refused to take me to a doctor. "Going to waste money for nothing," he would say to my mother when she rarely suggested that I might need help. It was around this time that I began to think about no longer existing. I was 15 and already saw no point in continuing to live. I would spend hours looking at the creek, thinking how easy it would be to simply let myself be carried away by the current. I even wrote a goodbye letter that I kept folded inside my English notebook, but I didn't have the courage. Instead, I began to isolate myself more and more. At school, I didn't talk to anyone. I sat at the back of the class and spent the lessons looking out the window. My old friends tried to approach me at first, but soon gave up. I had become the strange one, the quiet one, the girl nobody understood. At home, I avoided being in the same rooms as my father. I ate dinner before or after him, eating just enough not to faint. At night, when everyone was asleep, I would go out to the porch and look at the stars, imagining what it would be like to live somewhere else, to be someone else. It was in August 1967, shortly after I turned 15, that what would change my life forever happened. My father came home early from work with an expression I had never seen before. He seemed both irritated and satisfied at the same time, as if he had made an important decision. "Tomorrow you're not going to school," he announced during dinner. "Pack a change of clothes. We're leaving early." My mother looked at him in surprise. "Where are you going?" she asked. "I'm taking her to see a specialist in Atlanta," my father replied without looking directly at me. "A friend recommended someone who can fix this laziness of hers." I felt a chill in my stomach. What kind of specialist would this be? For a moment, I had hoped that finally someone would help me, understand what was happening to me. But the tone of my father's voice, the way he talked about fixing me, made me apprehensive. The next day, before the sun had even risen, we boarded a bus that would take us to Atlanta. The journey took all day. I sat far from my father, watching the fields and small towns pass by. He barely spoke to me during the trip, only to offer me a piece of bread with butter that my mother had sent. We arrived in Atlanta in the late afternoon. The city was much larger and noisier than our small town, with cars and buses everywhere. I had never seen so many people and buildings together. My father took a taxi and gave an address that I couldn't quite hear. We stopped in front of a large 2-story house, painted white, with bars on the windows. It didn't look like a hospital or doctor's office. There was no sign, nothing to indicate what kind of place it was. A middle-aged man, wearing a white shirt and dark pants, opened the gate for us. "Mr. Williams, we were expecting you," said the man, shaking my father's hand. "This is the girl," my father nodded. "This is Mary. She needs treatment." The man looked me up and down, as if evaluating an animal. "I understand perfectly. Many families go through this. Girls at this age sometimes need help to get back on the right path." Something in his voice frightened me. I looked at my father, trying to understand what was happening, but he avoided my gaze. "Father, what is this place?" I asked, my voice almost disappearing. "It's for your own good, Mary," was all he replied. "It will cure this laziness, this weakness of yours." We were taken inside the house. There were other girls there, all with empty looks, some older, some my age. Some seemed drugged, walking like zombies through the corridors. A strong smell of medicine and disinfectant filled the air. A man in a white coat appeared and talked quietly with my father. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw my father signing some papers. Then he approached me, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You're going to stay here for a while for your own good. When you get better, you'll come home." And then he left. He simply left me in that strange place with those people I didn't know. I tried to run after him, screaming, begging him not to leave me there. But 2 men held me by the arms, dragging me back inside. Only later did I discover where I was. It was a kind of clandestine clinic for treating troubled girls. Girls who got pregnant out of wedlock, who didn't obey their parents, who showed signs of mental deviation, as they called it. It was a terrible place where they did things I don't even want to remember. I stayed there for 3 weeks. 3 weeks that seemed like 3 years. They gave me medications that left me dizzy, confused. I took ice-cold baths at dawn to drive away the laziness. I heard endless sermons about obedience and daughter's duty. I was humiliated, treated like an animal. When I returned home to our town, I wasn't the same person anymore. Something inside me had broken for good. I obeyed mechanically, studied without questioning, didn't complain about anything. It was exactly what my father wanted, an obedient, quiet daughter who didn't cause any trouble. But the worst was yet to come. A few months after my return from that clinic, I began to feel nauseous, dizzy. My body, which was already thin, seemed even weaker. It was my mother who noticed first when she saw me vomiting in the backyard. "Mary," she asked with a strange expression on her face, "when was your last period?" I didn't know how to answer. With everything that had happened, I hadn't even paid attention to that. She looked at me in a way I'll never forget, a mixture of pity and anger. "Are you pregnant?" she said in a low voice. "Those men at the clinic, it happened there, didn't it?" I couldn't answer. The memories I had tried to block came back like lightning, the hands touching me during the night, the voices saying it was part of the treatment, the pain, the shame. I fell to my knees on the backyard ground and vomited again, this time out of pure despair. My mother helped me get up and took me to the bedroom. "Your father can't know," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "He'll kill you. He'll kill us." But of course, he found out. A neighbor saw us leaving the house of a woman known for solving problems of unmarried girls. When we returned home, he was waiting, the belt already in his hand. "So, that's it?" he shouted, his face red with rage. "All this time pretending to be studious, and in reality, you were just a common tramp." I tried to explain, to say it wasn't my fault, that I had been forced at that clinic that he himself had taken me to, but he didn't want to listen. The belt came down on my back once, twice, 10 times. My mother tried to intervene and got hit too. When the beating was over, he looked at us with contempt. "Tomorrow, I'm going to fix this, and it won't be with some local busybody." The next day, he took me back to Atlanta. This time we went to a different place, a small house in a remote neighborhood. A man who claimed to be a doctor, but I have my doubts, gave me something to drink. I woke up hours later, with terrible pains, bleeding so much that I thought I would die right there. "It's done," said the man to my father. "One more of these, and she might not survive. The uterus is damaged." We returned to our town the next day. I could barely walk, with a high fever, my whole body aching. My mother took care of me in silence, changing the bloodied cloths, giving me teas for the pain. We didn't talk about what had happened. It was as if we had made a silent pact to never mention it. But it was only the first of 5 abortions I went through in the following years. Always the same pattern. I was taken to that clinic in Atlanta, came back injured, bleeding, each time weaker. The 4th time, I had such a severe infection that I almost died. The 5th time, the doctor said I would never be able to have children. My uterus was destroyed. And in all instances, the person responsible was the same, my own father. He would get me pregnant and then force me to abort to hide his monstrosity. A cycle of horror that lasted from when I was 15 until I was 17. Nobody in town suspected. To everyone, Gerald Williams was a dedicated father, concerned about his daughter's education, an exemplary post office employee. At home, he was a monster who destroyed my life, my body, and my soul. And my mother? She knew. She saw, but did nothing. Fear paralyzed her. Sometimes, when we were alone, she would cry and ask for forgiveness. "I can't do anything, daughter," she would say. "If I report him, who will believe me? And where will we go? How will I support all of you?" So we lived in that white and blue wooden house, an apparently normal family on the outside, a hell inside. The violence continued until I was 17, when I finally managed to find a way out of that nightmare. But that's a story for another time. After everything I went through between 15 and 17, what remained was an empty shell of what I could have been. That girl full of potential, who even under excessive pressure dreamed of a better future, had disappeared. In her place, there was only a quiet young woman, with downcast eyes, who moved around the house like a shadow, trying to be invisible so as not to attract her father's attention. I woke up every morning with a weight on my chest, a feeling that it wasn't worth getting out of bed. The simple act of breathing seemed to require a huge effort. My body, already weakened by the successive abortions, was constantly in pain. I had chronic pains in my lower abdomen, irregular bleeding that local doctors couldn't explain or pretended not to understand the cause because nobody wanted to get involved with the respectable Mr. Williams from the post office. At school, my performance was mechanical. I studied because I had to, not because I had any interest or ambition. I answered the teacher's questions in a monotone voice, without life. I did the tasks with automatic precision, like a robot programmed to function, without feeling anything. Even so, my grades were good. The fear of what would happen if they weren't was greater than any discouragement. "What happened to you, Mary?" asked my English teacher, Mrs. Harrison, one of the few who noticed that something was wrong. "You used to be so lively, so curious. Now it seems like you've gone out." I couldn't answer. How to explain the unexplainable? How to tell the horror I lived at home without putting my siblings, my mother, at risk? I just shrugged and muttered something about being tired. Mrs. Harrison looked at me with sad eyes, as if she knew more than she said, but never insisted on the subject. At home, I avoided being alone with my father at all costs. When he came home from work, I would take refuge in the bedroom or invent chores in the kitchen with my mother. At night, I pushed a dresser against the door of the room I shared with Eunice, my sister. Even so, sometimes I would wake up startled, thinking he was there. The nightmares were constant, images of the clinic, of the procedures, of hands holding me down by force. And Eunice, at 11, didn't completely understand what was happening, but knew something terrible was happening to me. "Why do you cry in your sleep, Mary?" she would sometimes ask me, her eyes wide with concern. "Why do you say strange things when you're having a nightmare?" "It's just a bad dream," I would answer, trying to smile to reassure her. Everyone has nightmares sometimes. But they weren't just nightmares. It was my mind screaming what my mouth couldn't say. During the day, I kept quiet, obedient to survive. At night, in dreams, the screams escaped, the tears flowed. I began to develop strange habits, behaviors that today I recognize as symptoms of the profound trauma I was living. I washed my hands constantly until they were red and cracked. I couldn't bear to be touched, even if it was just an accidental bump in the school hallway. The smell of certain medicines, similar to those they gave me at the clinic, made me vomit instantly, and I was terrified of doctors, especially men in white coats. My body, which had been violated in so many ways, seemed to no longer belong to me. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone I didn't recognize. I began to wear increasingly loose clothes, trying to hide my form, to become invisible. I no longer cared about appearance, about hair, about anything that might draw attention. Food lost its taste. I ate because it was necessary, not because I felt hunger or pleasure. I lost so much weight that my ribs showed under my skin. My mother, in the rare moments when she showed concern, tried to make me eat more. "You're disappearing, girl," she would say, putting more food on my plate. But the food went down like sand, and many times I would vomit afterward without even trying. Worst of all was the constant feeling of being dirty, contaminated. I took long baths, scrubbing my skin hard, as if I could clean not just the body, but the soul. "You're going to use up all the water in the well," my mother would complain. But I couldn't stop. I needed that sensation of water running, taking away a bit of the horror. My siblings suffered with the situation, each in their own way. Joshua, at 13, began to spend more time on the street, avoiding coming home. Eunice became increasingly quiet, as if afraid to draw attention. Little Arnold, at just 9, was the only one who still maintained some joy, protected by the innocence of age. But even he noticed that our house wasn't like others, that something dark hung over us. I began to have ideas of escape, secretly planning how I could get away from that house, that town. I saved some coins that I got when I did small sewing jobs for neighbors. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough for a bus ticket. The problem was where to go. I had no relatives in other cities, didn't know anyone who could take me in. And the fear of being found and brought back was paralyzing. At school, the few friends who still tried to approach me gradually drifted away. I didn't talk, didn't smile, didn't participate in anything. In group work, I remained silent, just doing my part mechanically. During breaks, I sat alone, watching the other girls laugh and talk about normal things, boyfriends, parties, dreams for the future, things that to me seemed to belong to another world, a reality to which I no longer had access. "You've become a stranger, Mary," said Marjorie, who had been my best friend in childhood. "It seems like you're not here anymore, even when you're right beside us." She was right. I wasn't really there. Part of me had stayed in that clinic in Atlanta, or in the dark rooms where my own father destroyed my life piece by piece. What remained was just a ghost, a shadow wandering through the days without really living. At 16, I had a crisis that took me to the town hospital. I fainted during physical education class after days of barely eating anything. At the hospital, Dr. Edwards, an older doctor who had known my family for years, examined me carefully. He noticed the scars on my abdomen, the signs of poorly done procedures, the extreme malnutrition. "What happened to this girl?" he asked my mother, who was beside me, tense and pale. "She's been weak since she was little," my mother lied, avoiding looking the doctor in the eye. "She's always eaten poorly." Dr. Edwards looked at her with suspicion, then at me. I saw in his eyes that he knew, or at least suspected the truth. But like so many others in our small town, he chose silence, limiting himself to prescribing vitamins and a special diet, recommending rest and tranquility. When we left the hospital, my mother gripped my arm tightly. "Not a word about this to your father," she whispered, fear evident in her voice. "He'll say you're pretending to get attention." That hospital visit had an unexpected consequence. My father, fearing that more curious doctors might discover what was really happening, reduced the physical violence for a time, not out of remorse or compassion, but out of fear of being discovered. Still, the looks, the cutting words, the veiled threats continued. The terror just changed form, became more subtle, more psychological. It was around this time that I began to write a diary hidden under a loose floorboard in the bedroom. It wasn't an ordinary diary, with day-to-day accounts. It was more a repository of nightmares, of fears, of escape plans. I wrote at night, by candlelight, when everyone was asleep. It was my only escape valve, the only way to express what I felt without risk of being punished for it. On one of the pages, I wrote, "If one day I manage to get out of here, I'll never come back. I'll go so far that not even the memories can reach me. I'll change my name, my face, my life. I'll become another person. Someone who never went through what I went through, someone clean, whole, normal." It was an impossible dream, of course. No one can completely escape their own past. The marks remain not just on the body, but on the soul. Even so, that idea of a fresh start, however illusory it might be, gave me strength to keep breathing, to face one more day. At 17, something inside me began to change. It wasn't a sudden change, but slow, almost imperceptible at first. The pain and fear were still there, but alongside them, something new emerged: anger. A silent, deep anger that boiled inside like lava. Anger at my father for everything he had done. Anger at my mother for not having protected me. Anger at the entire town that closed its eyes to what was happening inside that white and blue wooden house. Anger wasn't a pretty or noble feeling, but it gave me back a bit of life. I began to eat better, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to get strong. I began to pay more attention in class, not out of interest, but because knowledge could be a weapon, a way to escape. I began to observe more, to plan more carefully. I realized I needed money if I wanted to run far away. I got a small job after school, helping at Mr. Anderson's grocery store, an old man who didn't ask many questions. I saved every penny in an empty cookie tin, hidden in the same place as the diary. It wasn't much, but it grew each week. I also began to pay attention to the buses that left town. I learned the schedules, the destinations, the ticket prices. I knew that Atlanta was out of the question. It would be the first place my father would look for me. I needed to go further, maybe to another state. At night, when I couldn't sleep, I would unfold an old map of the United States that I had gotten at school and study the cities, the rivers, the roads. I dreamed of places where nobody knew me, where I could start from zero. But it wasn't just the physical escape that I was planning. I was also slowly rebuilding something inside me. It wasn't hope. It was far from that. It was a kind of dark determination, a resolution that I wouldn't let that story end with my complete destruction. In the darkest moments, when the weight of memories threatened to crush me, I would repeat to myself, "I'll survive this. I'll survive him. One day, I'll be far away and free." It was a mantra, a promise I made to myself every night before sleeping, every morning upon waking. And it was this promise, this determination born of pain and anger that finally gave me the strength to do what needed to be done. Because despite all the horror I lived through, something inside me refused to completely give up. That spark of life, that stubbornness in continuing to exist, despite everything, would be my salvation. And so, at 17, marked by visible and invisible scars, I began to walk toward what would be my turning point, the moment when I would finally manage to escape that hell and slowly begin to rebuild what remained of my life. It was in March 1970, shortly after I turned 18, that my life took a completely different direction. By this point, I had saved almost $200 in my cookie tin, the result of almost a year working at Mr. Anderson's grocery store and doing small sewing jobs. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough to take me far from our town. The plan was simple. I would take the bus to Nashville, Tennessee, and from there continue to Chicago. I had heard that in Chicago there were many jobs for young women in factories. Maybe I could start over there, anonymous among millions of people. But destiny has strange paths, and it was an unexpected event that changed everything. One afternoon, while I was arranging the shelves at the grocery store, I heard a voice I didn't know asking Mr. Anderson about places to stay in town. "I'm passing through," the woman was saying. "I'm a nurse, and I'm here on business. I'll stay just a few days." I raised my eyes and saw a lady of about 50, gray hair tied in a bun, simple but well-kept clothes. She had a calm way of speaking, a presence that conveyed security. Her name was Catherine Thompson, as I discovered later. "Hotel here, just the central one on the square," replied Mr. Anderson. "But it's not much, you know. If you want something more comfortable, maybe some family will rent a room." The woman sighed, looking at her watch. "The hotel will have to do. I just arrived and still need to report to the health center." I don't know what came over me at that moment. Maybe it was her manner, or maybe it was just the desperation of someone looking for any way out. The fact is that I approached, and in a voice I barely recognized as my own, said, "My family has a spare room, ma'am. It's simple, but clean. It's close to the health center." It was a lie, of course. We didn't have a spare room, and my father would never allow a stranger in the house. But something propelled me to speak, as if a force greater than myself guided my words. The woman looked at me with curiosity. "Really? And your parents wouldn't mind?" "My mother rents the room now and then to supplement the income," I continued, lying, now unable to stop. "I can take you to see it if you want." Mr. Anderson gave me a suspicious look. He knew my family and knew that wasn't true. But for some reason I never completely understood. He didn't contradict me. He just shrugged and went back to organizing the merchandise. "Well, it would be convenient to stay near the health center," said Mrs. Thompson thoughtfully. "Let's take a look then. My name is Catherine Thompson. I'm a nurse with the Traveling Health Program. Mary Williams, I replied, extending my trembling hand. Can I help you with your suitcase? And so we left the grocery store together. As we walked, my mind worked frantically. What was I doing? Where would I take her? How would I explain the lie? Actually, ma'am, I began, stopping suddenly in the middle of the street. We don't have a room to rent. I lied. Mrs. Thompson looked at me in surprise. And why would you do that, child? The words simply escaped from my mouth like water from a dam that breaks. Because I need to get out of this town. I need help. I can't stand living here anymore. Something in my tone or in my expression must have touched the nurse. Instead of getting irritated with the lie, she led me to a bench in the town square. Sit here and tell me what's happening, she said in a calm but firm voice. And I told her, not everything, I couldn't. But I talked about the pressure, about the violence, about how I felt trapped and desperate. I talked about my escape plan, the money I had saved, the constant fear I felt. Mrs. Thompson listened to everything in silence, her brown eyes fixed on me, occasionally nodding. She didn't show shock or disbelief, just a solemn attention that, by itself, was already a balm for my wounded soul. There's more than what you're telling me, isn't there? She finally asked when I stopped talking. I lowered my eyes, unable to answer. The tears I had managed to hold back until then began to run down my face. It's all right, she continued, gently placing her hand on my shoulder. It was the first time in years that I didn't flinch at someone's touch. You don't need to tell me everything now, but I see that it's serious and that you really need help. At that moment, I felt a strange thing, a mixture of relief and fear. Relief at finally having said something to someone, at having been heard without judgment. Fear because I didn't know what would come next, if she would report me or abandon me like everyone else. I'm staying at the field hospital behind the health center, said Mrs. Thompson after a few minutes of silence. I travel with a medical team through the interior of Tennessee. In 3 days, we'll continue to Nashville, then Louisville, and finally Chicago. If you want, you can come with me as a helper. I can't promise much, just passage on the bus and food, but it would be a start, a way out. I looked at her, hardly believing what I was hearing. You'd really take me even without knowing me well? She smiled slightly. Sometimes, Mary, life puts people in our path for a reason. I've seen many young women in difficult situations in the places I visit. I've learned to recognize when someone really needs an outstretched hand. 3 days. That was the time I had to decide and prepare. 3 days that seemed at the same time an eternity and the blink of an eye. I need to think, I finally replied. I have younger siblings. I don't know if I can just leave. I understand, she said, getting up from the bench. I'll be at the health center until Friday. If you decide to come, be at the bus station at 5 a.m. on Saturday with your documents and just the essentials in a bag. If you don't come, I'll understand that too. I returned home that day with my head spinning. The possibility of escape was real now, not just a distant dream, but doubts consumed me. What if my father discovered it before? What if I was trading one danger for another? After all, I barely knew Mrs. Thompson. And my siblings, how would they be without me to protect them? I spent the next 2 days in a state of constant anxiety. During the day, I went to school and work, as always, trying not to show anything different. At night, I looked at Eunice, sleeping in the bed next to mine, and felt my heart tighten. She was only 14 and Arnold 12. Joshua, at 16, already showed signs of wanting to leave home too. On Thursday night, I made my decision. I sat next to Joshua in the backyard while he was fixing an old fishing net. I'm leaving on Saturday, I whispered, making sure that no one else could hear. I found a way to get out of town with a nurse who's passing through. Joshua stopped what he was doing and looked at me with wide eyes. You're running away? But to where? First to Nashville, then. I don't know yet, but I can't stay here. Joshua, you know what happens in this house. You see what he does to me. My brother lowered his eyes. He did know. Maybe he didn't know everything, but enough to understand. He had heard the screams, seen the bruises, noticed my sudden disappearances, followed by days in bed, bleeding and crying. "Take me with you," he asked, his voice trembling. "I want to get out of here too." That broke my heart. "I can't, my brother. I can barely support myself, let alone both of us. Besides, if we run away together, he'll come after us with full force. But I promise that as soon as I establish myself somewhere, I'll come back for you. And then for Eunice and Arnold too." Joshua was silent for a long time, his hands busy again with the net, but his eyes lost in thought. "You really need to go," he said finally. "Before he kills you for good, or worse." I hugged my brother tightly, feeling his tears wet my shoulder. It was the first time I had seen him cry since he was a child. "I'll help you," he whispered. "I'll distract Dad on Saturday morning. He usually wakes up early, but I'll make noise at night. Say there's someone prowling around the backyard. He'll stay awake, and in the morning he'll be in a deep sleep." On Friday, I made my final preparations, putting my birth certificate and the few documents I had in a small bag, along with 2 changes of clothes, the money I had saved, and a photo of my siblings. I wouldn't take anything else from town. I wanted to leave behind everything that could remind me of that place. At night, I gave a long hug to Eunice and Arnold, knowing that it could be the last for a long time. I didn't tell them I was leaving. They were too young to keep that secret, and I was afraid something might slip. When I lay down, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, the creaking of the wood, the croaking of frogs in the backyard, recording in memory those last moments. In the early hours, as arranged, Joshua made a noise in the backyard, shouting that he had seen someone. My father got up running, grabbed an old shotgun he kept, and stood watch for hours. When he finally returned to bed, it was already past 3 a.m. At 4:30, I got up without making a sound. Joshua was already up, waiting at the front door. I hugged him one last time. "I'll come back for you," I promised, "no matter how long it takes." "Go with God, sis," he replied, his voice choked. I went without looking back. The path to the bus station never seemed so long to me. Every shadow seemed to be my father. Every noise seemed to be someone following me. But finally I arrived, my heart beating so hard I thought it would explode in my chest. Mrs. Thompson was already there along with 3 more people who I recognized as part of the medical team. She smiled when she saw me, without surprise, as if she already knew I would come. "Ready?" she asked simply. I nodded, not trusting my voice. The bus, a medium-sized vehicle painted white with a red cross on the side, was already being loaded with boxes of medicines and equipment. "You're going to work to earn your passage," explained Mrs. Thompson as we boarded. "You'll help organize the medicines, prepare patient records, keep everything clean. It's not difficult work, but it requires responsibility." "I'll do whatever is necessary," I replied, relieved to have something concrete to focus on. When the bus began to move away from the station, I stayed at the back, watching the town get smaller in the distance, the white and blue house, the church, the school, the places that had been the setting of my suffering for 18 years, all being left behind, swallowed by the morning fog that rose from the nearby creek. I didn't cry, didn't feel sadness or nostalgia, just an immense relief, as if a huge weight had been taken from my shoulders. For the first time in many years, I breathed deeply, feeling the morning air fill my lungs, bringing the promise of a different life. The journey to Nashville lasted 2 days. On the bus, besides Mrs. Thompson, there was Dr. Everett, an elderly and quiet doctor, Teresa, a nursing technician from Chicago, and Sebastian, a young man who drove the bus and helped carry the equipment. They all treated me with kindness, without asking many questions about my past, as if they understood there were things I didn't want to talk about. In Nashville, we worked for a week at the local health center. I helped organize the lines, fill out forms, separate medications. It was simple work, but it gave me purpose and, for the first time in my life, a genuine feeling of usefulness. At night, we slept in small rooms at the back of the center, women on one side, men on the other. It was during this period that Mrs. Thompson began to teach me the basics of nursing. Not in an official way, I didn't have the education for that, but small, practical things, like how to dress a wound, how to give an injection, how to recognize basic symptoms of common diseases in the region. "You have good hands for this," she said once, observing how I bandaged a child's arm. "Steady, but gentle. It's a gift." Her words touched me deeply. It was the first time someone had recognized something good in me, a skill, a quality. I wasn't the lazy one, the problematic one, or the difficult one. I was someone with a gift, with potential. From Nashville, we continued to Louisville, then to other smaller towns along the way. In each place, I learned more about caring for people, about medications, about diseases and treatments. It wasn't formal knowledge from books, but practical, born of necessity and direct experience. 2 months after my escape from my hometown, we finally arrived in Chicago. The big city that before had been just a name on a map, now represented possibilities. Mrs. Thompson took me to stay at her house, a simple but cozy building in a working-class neighborhood on the east side of the city. "You can stay here until you get established," she said. "I have a spare room since my daughter got married." I stayed with Mrs. Thompson for almost a year. During this time, I got a job as an aide in a small clinic, using what I had learned during the trips. The salary was small, but enough to start saving money again. I sent news to Joshua through acquaintances who traveled to my hometown, always careful so my father wouldn't discover my whereabouts. It was through these messages that I learned the situation at home had worsened. My father, furious with my escape, had become even more violent. Joshua, now 17, faced the weight of his anger. Eunice and Arnold suffered less, but lived in constant tension. My mother, as always, remained submissive, unable to protect the children. This news filled me with guilt and worry. I had escaped, but at the cost of my siblings' suffering. The promise to return for them weighed on my heart each day. In 1971, almost a year after my escape, I learned that Joshua had also left town, not for Chicago, but for Memphis, where a distant uncle on our mother's side lived. I was relieved for him, but even more worried about Eunice and Arnold, now alone with our parents. It was around this time that Mrs. Thompson introduced me to a government program that sent healthcare professionals to the West Coast, where manpower was lacking. It wasn't for trained nurses, but for aides with practical experience like me. It would be an opportunity to start over in a completely new place, she said. Far from the memories, far from the fear of being found. The idea immediately attracted me. Chicago, despite being large, was still too close to my hometown. I still found myself looking over my shoulder in the streets, fearing to see my father. I still woke up startled with nightmares where he found me and dragged me back. "Where would I go?" I asked. "California," replied Mrs. Thompson, "a city called Bakersfield. It's very different from what you know. Different climate, different culture, but maybe that's exactly what you need. A place where nobody knows your story, where you can be whoever you want." In October 1971, at 19, I boarded a plane for the first time in my life, bound for Los Angeles. From there, I would continue by bus to Bakersfield. Mrs. Thompson accompanied me to the airport, gave me a tight hug and a small package. "Only open it when you're in the air," she said with a gentle smile. Inside the plane, nervous with the sound of the engines and the strange sensation of leaving the ground, I opened the package. It was a silver nursing pin with a small note. "To remember that hands that heal can also be healed. With love, Catherine." I cried silently during almost the entire flight, but they weren't tears of sadness. It was as if something inside me, frozen for so long, finally began to thaw. The kindness of Mrs. Thompson, the possibility of a new life, the hope, tenuous but real, that one day I could reunite with my siblings in a safe place. All of this opened in my chest, a small crack of light, in what before was only darkness. When the plane landed in Los Angeles, I felt that I was not just in another region of the country, but in another world. The warm October air in California made me shed the heavy coat that Mrs. Thompson had given me. People spoke differently, dressed differently, even walked in a different way than I was used to back east. I took the bus to Bakersfield with a mixture of fear and expectation. I didn't know what awaited me there, but I knew that whatever it was, it would be the beginning of a new phase of my life. A life that, for the first time, would be mine to build. I arrived in Bakersfield on an October afternoon in 1971. It was a hot, sunny day, so different from the cold autumn in my hometown that it seemed I had disembarked on another planet. The city, with its mix of architectural styles, organized streets, and diverse people, was a complete contrast to everything I knew. I was received by Mrs. Helen Miller, a lady who coordinated the small health center where I would work. Tall, robust, with gray hair always tied in a tight bun, she had a direct way of speaking that initially frightened me. "You're from the East, aren't you? You'll need lighter clothes," was the first thing she said to me, looking at my heavy jacket. "And you'll have to get used to our ways. Here we work hard and don't waste time with small talk." In the first days, I stayed at Mrs. Miller's house, a 2-story building with an impeccably maintained garden. The room she gave me was small but comfortable, with a window that overlooked an orange tree loaded with fruit. Work at the health center began immediately. It was quite different from what I did with Mrs. Thompson in the rural communities. Here there was more organization, more resources, but also more rules and formalities. My job was to assist with dressings, organize records, prepare patients for consultations, and occasionally help with simple procedures. The adaptation was difficult at first. People's accents, the different food, the warm climate, everything made me feel like a stranger. In the first months, I cried alone at night, missing my siblings, worried about what might be happening to them. I sent letters to Joshua through the address in Memphis that he had sent me, but the answers took months to arrive. In one of these letters, I learned that Eunice had also run away from home, going to Nashville, where she was being temporarily sheltered by Mrs. Thompson. This brought me enormous relief. My sister, now 15, was safe. Only Arnold, at 13, remained in our hometown with our parents. Despite the initial difficulties, something in me was beginning to heal. Being far from my hometown, far from my father, in a place where nobody knew my past, was like finally being able to breathe after years of suffocating. People in Bakersfield knew me only as the girl from the East, the new nursing aide. Nobody knew the horrors I had lived through, and this gave me the chance to be another person, to start over. Mrs. Miller, despite her rigid manner, proved to be a good mentor. She noticed my dedication to work and patience and gradually began to teach me more about nursing and patient care. "You have a gift for this," she would tell me, echoing Mrs. Thompson's words. "You have patience and care. The patients like you." After 6 months living with Mrs. Miller, I managed to rent a small room at the back of a local family's house. The Jacksons' space was modest, just a bed, a wardrobe, and a small table. But it was mine, the first place I could truly call my own in my entire life. The Jackson family consisted of Joe, a middle-aged widowed carpenter, and his 2 teenage children, Kevin and Hannah. They treated me with respect and included me in Sunday meals when Joe prepared traditional barbecue. It was with them that I learned a bit about local culture and began to feel part of the community. It was also through the Jacksons that I came to know local crafts. Hannah, Joe's daughter, participated in a group of women who met weekly to do handiwork: knitting, crochet, embroidery, tapestry. One day she invited me to accompany her. "You spend too much time alone in your room," said Hannah. "Come with us. It'll do you good." Reluctant at first, I ended up accepting. The group met at Mrs. Parker's house, an elderly lady who had been a teacher and now dedicated her time to teaching craft techniques. There were about 10 women of varying ages, all interested in preserving traditional crafts. "I've never done this before," I confessed, looking at the knitting needles that Hannah had lent me. "We all started from zero one day," replied Mrs. Parker with a gentle smile. "I'll show you the basic stitches." And to my surprise, I loved knitting from the first attempt. There was something almost meditative in the repetitive movement of the needles, in the gradual growth of the fabric between my hands. It was as if each stitch helped organize my thoughts, calm the painful memories that still haunted me. Soon, I began to attend the group regularly. I learned not just knitting, but also crochet, embroidery, and eventually, techniques of weaving on small looms. The women in the group, initially distant with the outsider from the East, gradually opened up to me, sharing stories, recipes, advice. In 1973, after almost 2 years in Bakersfield, I received a letter that would again change the course of my life. It was from Joshua, saying he had secured a stable job in a factory in Memphis and was planning to get Arnold from our hometown. "Our father is sick," he wrote. "Liver problems from drinking. He shouldn't last long. When he's gone, I'll go get Arnold, and if you can, I'd like to send him to stay with you. Memphis isn't a place for a boy his age." The news about my father caused me conflicting feelings. There was no forgiveness in my heart for what he had done, but I also didn't wish suffering on anyone. As for Arnold coming to live with me, the idea filled me with joy and apprehension. I very much wanted to see my little brother again, to take care of him, to give him a chance for a better life. But my small room at the back of the Jacksons' house barely fit me, let alone a growing teenager. I decided to talk to Joe Jackson about my situation. To my surprise, he offered a solution I hadn't considered. "I have a small house on the lot next door that was my mother-in-law's," he said. "It's been empty since she died last year. It would need some repairs, but you could rent it for a very affordable price. You'd have space for you and your brother." The house Joe mentioned was indeed small, just 2 bedrooms, a combined living room and kitchen, and a bathroom, but to me it seemed like a palace. In the following months, I worked overtime at the health center to save money for rent and for preparations for Arnold's arrival. Joe and Kevin helped with the necessary repairs, fixing the roof that had some leaks and restoring the wooden windows. Hannah and the women from the craft group contributed with new curtains, tablecloths, small details that transformed the empty house into a home. In July 1973, I received a telegram from Joshua. "Father died. I'm with Arnold. Will arrive in 2 weeks." The news of my father's death brought a strange emptiness. There was neither sadness nor joy, just the feeling that a very painful chapter of my life was finally closing. My mother, according to Joshua later informed, would remain in our hometown, where she had relatives. When I finally saw Arnold getting off the bus at the Bakersfield station, I could hardly believe how much he had grown. He was no longer the little boy of my memories, but a 15-year-old adolescent, tall and thin, with the same sad look that I used to see in the mirror. "Sis!" he shouted when he saw me, running to hug me. We hugged for a long time, tears freely running down my face. Joshua stayed only a week with us before returning to Memphis, where he had his job and was building his own life. He promised to visit whenever he could and maintain regular contact through letters. Arnold's adaptation to life in California wasn't easy. The climate, the food, people's accents, everything was strange to him. Besides that, he carried emotional scars from the years lived with our father after my departure. He was quiet, startled at sudden movements, had frequent nightmares. "Did he hit you too?" I asked one night when I found him crying in the kitchen after a nightmare. Arnold nodded without looking me in the eyes. "After you and Joshua left, it got worse, much worse. I enrolled Arnold in the local school and got him an afternoon job as a helper in Joe Jackson's carpentry shop. Working with wood seemed to calm him, giving him a purpose and a way to channel his emotions. In the following years, we slowly built a new life in Bakersfield. Arnold graduated from high school and then followed the path of carpentry, becoming Joe's formal apprentice. I continued at the health center, but dedicated more and more time to crafts, which had become not just a hobby, but a form of therapy. In 1976, at 24, I met Ernest Howard, a young farmer from a property on the outskirts of the city. He came regularly to the health center because of a chronic knee injury, the result of an accident during harvest. He was a calm man, of few words but gentle gestures. After a few consultations, he invited me to have coffee in the central square. I initially refused. The idea of getting involved with a man still terrified me, considering everything I had lived through. But Ernest didn't give up, continuing to treat me with respect and patience. "You don't need to be afraid of me," he said once, noticing my discomfort when he tried to hold my hand. "We can go at your pace, no rush." Gradually, very cautiously, I allowed Ernest to get closer. He was the first man I trusted after everything I went through. Our relationship progressed slowly. Months of conversations, walks always in public places, small gestures of affection that gradually broke down the barriers I had erected around my heart. Ernest knew there were shadows in my past, though I never told the complete details of what I had lived through in my hometown. He respected my silences, my moments of retreat, my occasional panic attacks when something, a smell, a sound, a word, brought unwanted flashbacks. In 1978, after 2 years of dating, we married in a simple ceremony at the small local Baptist church. Arnold, now 20 and working as an official carpenter, was my best man. Joshua came from Memphis for the ceremony, bringing his wife and young son. Eunice, who had settled in Columbus, Ohio, and worked as a secretary in a school, also attended. It was the first time in almost 10 years that we 4 siblings were together again. Sitting at the table at the wedding reception, we shared stories, tears, and finally, some genuine smiles. We had survived, each in our own way, with our scars. But we had survived. Ernest and I went to live on his small rural property, about 6 miles from the center of Bakersfield. It was a simple but comfortable house, surrounded by almond orchards and a small vegetable garden. There, finally, I began to feel a peace that I had never known before. I left the job at the health center and began to dedicate myself fully to crafts. With Ernest's support, I set up a small studio in the extra room of the house, where I produced pieces of knitting, crochet, and tapestry that I sold at the city's fair on Saturdays. The doctor who attended me when I had a strong flu in 1979 confirmed what I had already suspected since the forced abortions in adolescence. My uterus was irreversibly damaged and I could never have biological children. The news, though expected, still hurt deeply. Ernest, beside me at the consultation, squeezed my hand and said simply, "We still have a lot of love to give." In 1980, we adopted Matthew, a 3-month-old baby who had been abandoned at the door of the local hospital. The adoption process was facilitated by the connections I still maintained at the health center and by the good name Ernest had in the community. 2 years later, we also adopted Claire, a 4-year-old girl whose parents had died in an accident. Raising Matthew and Claire brought me a joy I never imagined possible. Seeing their little faces in the morning, hearing their laughter, taking care of their needs and fears, teaching them their first words and steps. All of this was healing, day by day, the deep wounds I carried. It wasn't an easy or linear process. There were bad days when the memories came back full force, when panic paralyzed me, when depression, a longtime companion, covered everything with its gray mantle. But on those days I had Ernest, the children, my crafts, the support of friends like Hannah and Joe Jackson. Little by little, year after year, I rebuilt myself, not as the person I would have been without the traumas. That person was lost forever, but as someone new, forged both by pain and by overcoming. Someone who had scars, yes, but also strength, resilience, and, finally, some measure of peace. Today, at 73, I live a life that I never imagined possible in my darkest times in my hometown. I still live on the same rural property, on the outskirts of Bakersfield. Although the house has undergone renovations and expansions over the years, the small studio that Ernest built for me has transformed into a larger, luminous space with large windows that look out on the almond orchard we planted together. Ernest, my life companion for more than 4 decades, passed away 3 years ago, a victim of lung cancer. It was a loss that shook me deeply, but unlike the losses of my youth, this one came surrounded by love, care, friendly hands to support me. Our children, Matthew and Claire, took turns staying with me in the most difficult months after his departure. Matthew, now 45, followed in his father's footsteps in agriculture, but with a more modern approach. He graduated in agronomy and today manages not just our property, but also provides consulting for other rural producers in the region. He married Laura, a teacher at the local school, and gave me 2 wonderful grandchildren, Peter, 15, and Julia, 12. Claire, at 43, became a nurse, perhaps influenced by the stories I told about my time at the health center and about Mrs. Thompson. She works at the regional hospital and has a special way with patients, especially the elderly. She divorced a few years ago, but maintains a friendly relationship with her ex-husband because of the twins, Raphael and Renata, 10, who spend almost every weekend with me. My siblings followed their own paths. Joshua built a solid life in Memphis, where he became a supervisor at the same factory where he began as a worker. He has 3 children and 5 grandchildren, and we talk on the phone almost every week. Eunice settled in Columbus, Ohio, where she worked as a secretary until retirement. She never married, but adopted a girl on her own, my niece, Cecilia, who is now a lawyer. Arnold remained in Bakersfield. He became a renowned carpenter in the region, specializing in artisanal furniture. He lives just 20 minutes from here, which allows frequent meetings. My mother died in 1985 in our hometown without my having seen her again. The relationship with her was always complicated. Part of me understood her fear and powerlessness in the face of my father. Another part never managed to forgive her omission. I sent money for the funeral and a wreath of flowers, but I couldn't go to the burial. The idea of returning to that town still caused me panic. Crafts, which began as a form of therapy, became my main occupation and source of joy. Over time, I developed my own style, mixing traditional techniques learned from the ladies of Bakersfield with motifs and colors from the eastern United States that I brought from my childhood memories. This unusual mix caught attention at local fairs, and soon I began to receive orders from craft stores in larger cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco. In the 1990s, when Matthew and Claire were already teenagers, I participated in a state craft fair in Los Angeles, where my work was noticed by a journalist from a decoration magazine. The report she did about my pieces, highlighting the unique mixture of Eastern and Western cultures, opened doors that I had never imagined. Invitations began to come to exhibit in galleries, to give workshops, to participate in books about American crafts. I never accepted invitations that required long trips or stays in big cities. The comfort of my home and proximity to my family were always priorities, but I opened my studio to those who wanted to learn, especially young women from the region who, like me in the past, sought a form of expression and sometimes of healing through handwork. It was one of these young women, Marina, who convinced me to create a profile on social media about 2 years ago. At first, I thought the idea was absurd. What would a lady of more than 70 years have to share on the internet? But Marina insisted, saying that my story and my work could inspire people of all ages. People need to know that it's possible to rebuild life after traumas, she said. And you, Mrs. Mary, you're living proof of that. Reluctantly, I allowed her to create the profiles and teach me the basics to manage them. To my surprise, the posts about my crafts and small excerpts of my life story began to attract followers. Nothing extraordinary in terms of numbers, but enough to make me feel connected with people I never imagined knowing. It was through these networks that my great-niece Taylor, Cecilia's daughter, contacted me last year. A journalism student, she was doing a project about stories of women who overcame adversities. When she visited Bakersfield to meet me in person, the idea arose to record longer videos, telling my life journey. I confess that at first I was apprehensive. There were parts of my story that I had never shared completely, not even with my children. The violence I suffered, the forced abortions, the darkest details of the years in my hometown. All this remained buried in a corner of my mind that I rarely visited. But Taylor, with her sensitivity and respect, convinced me that sharing could help other women who go through similar situations. "Your story is not just yours, Grandma Mary," she said. "It's the story of so many women who suffer in silence, who think there's no way out." And so we began this video project that you are watching now. Each recording is a dive into the past, sometimes painful, sometimes liberating. There are days when, after Taylor leaves with her equipment, I spend hours in my studio, knitting in silence, processing the memories that were brought to the surface. My routine today is quiet, as befits a lady of my age. I wake up early, around 6 a.m., a habit I maintain from the times in my hometown. I have my morning coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise over the orchards. Then, depending on the day, I dedicate a few hours to crafts in my studio or receive students for classes. On Wednesdays, I go to the city fair to sell my pieces, more for the pleasure of talking with people than for financial necessity. Ernest left us well-structured, and Matthew's efficient administration ensures that nothing is lacking. On Sundays, the house fills with the presence of children, grandchildren, Arnold and his family, and occasionally longtime friends like Hannah Jackson, who continues to be my closest friend. The scars of the past never completely disappeared. I still have occasional nightmares. I still startle at sudden noises. I still avoid certain subjects and situations that can serve as triggers. I can't say I overcame everything. I think some wounds are too deep to heal completely, but I learned to live with them, not to let them define who I am or limit my ability to feel joy. When I look back at the terrified girl I was in my hometown, at the desperate young woman who fled on a bus, at the traumatized woman who slowly rebuilt her life in Bakersfield, I feel a mixture of compassion and admiration. The path to here wasn't easy. There were moments when I almost gave up, when the pain seemed too great to bear, but somehow, one step at a time, I kept walking. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson I can share with you. Life can break us in ways that seem irreparable, but as long as we breathe, there exists the possibility of healing. It may not be a complete healing, it may not return exactly what we lost, but it allows us to continue, to find new purposes, to build new bonds, to discover beauty even after horror. My hands, which knew so much pain, today create beauty in each knitting stitch, in each macrame knot, in each piece that weaves not just threads, but also memories, hopes, dreams. Crafting saved me in many ways. It gave me a language when words failed, connected me with other women when I most needed connection, allowed me to transform suffering into something beautiful and useful. Today, sitting in this living room in Bakersfield, with my great-niece operating the camera, surrounded by pieces I've created over the years, I feel a deep gratitude. Gratitude for having survived, for having found people like Mrs. Thompson, Mrs. Miller, the Jackson family, my dear Ernest, angels who appeared at the right moments to help me move forward. Gratitude for my siblings who also survived and built their lives. Gratitude for my children and grandchildren who gave me the family I thought I would never have. The journey hasn't ended, of course. As long as there's life, there will be challenges, there will be growth, there will be learning. At 73, I'm still discovering new craft techniques. I'm still learning to navigate this digital world so different from the one I grew up in. I'm still finding ways to transform my story into something that can help others. And perhaps in the end, that's what gives meaning to everything we've lived through. The ability to use our experiences, even the most painful ones, to extend a hand to those who are still in the middle of the storm and say, "I survived. You can too." If there's one thing I've learned in my 73 years of life, it's that our stories, however painful they may be, can become sources of strength and inspiration. When I began sharing my experiences, I never imagined the impact they would have. I received messages from women of all ages saying they found courage to seek help, to leave abusive relationships, to start over after traumas similar to those I lived through. For you who are watching and perhaps going through something similar, I want to say with all the certainty in my heart, there is a way out. It may seem impossible now when the walls of suffering are closed around you. But believe this old woman who has seen it all. Life can change, and you have more strength inside you than you imagine. The first step is the hardest, recognizing that you don't deserve the abuse, that you're not guilty for what's happening. For years, I believed that somehow I had provoked the violence I suffered, that if I were better, more obedient, smarter, my father wouldn't have done what he did. That's the lie that abusers make us believe to maintain their power over us. The second step is to seek help. Today, there are resources that I never dreamed of having access to in my youth. The Women's Crisis Center is present in many cities. The Domestic Violence Hotline receives reports of violence against women 24 hours a day. There are shelters, support groups, trained professionals to offer psychological support. I know it can be frightening. I know that many times it seems there's nowhere to go, especially when the abuser is someone from the family, someone who should protect you. I understand this fear, as few people can understand. But I also know that staying means allowing the violence to continue, to deepen, perhaps to reach a point of no return. If you're young and suffering abuse, know that there are child protective services, the school, health professionals who are required by law to report cases of violence against children and adolescents. Talk to a teacher you trust, with the nurse at the health center, with any adult who can intercede for you. If you're an adult and in an abusive relationship, remember that you have rights, that there are laws like the Violence Against Women Act, which were created precisely to protect women in situations of violence. Don't be ashamed to seek legal help, to file a police report, to request protective measures. And if you know someone who's going through this, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a neighbor, don't close your eyes as so many closed them to what was happening to me. A word of support, a friendly shoulder, guidance on where to seek professional help can literally save a life. For those who, like me, have already gone through the worst and are in the process of reconstruction, I want to say that healing isn't linear. There will be good days and bad days. There will be moments when the memories will return full force, when fear and pain will seem as fresh as on the first day. This is normal. It's part of the process. Therapy helped me a lot, though I only had access to it as an adult, when the traumas had created deep roots. If you can, seek professional help. Don't try to carry this burden alone. There are psychologists specialized in trauma, support groups where you can share your story with other survivors, medications that can help control anxiety and depression when necessary. Find something that gives you purpose, that connects you with the beauty that still exists in the world. For me, it was crafts. It was feeling the threads between my fingers, creating patterns and colors that reminded me that there was still possible order and beauty, even after chaos. For you, it may be something else: art, music, writing, volunteer work, gardening, any activity that makes your heart open a little, that reminds you that you are more than what happened to you. And if, like me, you discover that some wounds are permanent, like my infertility caused by forced abortions, know that there are other paths to build a family, to give and receive love. My adopted children brought a joy to my life that I never imagined possible. They didn't erase what I lived through, but they gave me a new chapter, one that I myself could write, free from the shadows of the past. The truth is that we will never be who we would have been without the traumas. That person was taken from us, but we can become someone new, someone strong, precisely because of what we survived, someone capable of extending a hand to others who are still in darkness. My story didn't end in that white and blue wooden house in my hometown, nor in the clandestine clinics of Atlanta, where so many atrocities happened. My story continued, transformed, blossomed in ways that I could never have predicted in my darkest moments. Yours can too. If you'll allow me, I'd like to end with a special message for my journey companions, women who, like me, carry visible and invisible scars. We are stronger than we know. We are more resilient than we imagine. Our stories matter. Our lives matter. And as long as we continue telling our truths, keeping alive the light that others tried to extinguish, we will be not just surviving, but winning. Thank you for listening to me, for allowing me to share my journey. I hope that at some point in this long conversation, something I said has touched your heart, has lit a small light of hope or understanding. My dears, if this story touched your heart, please hit the subscribe button and activate the bell. Each subscription isn't just a number for me. It's proof that my pain wasn't in vain, that sharing can really make a difference in someone's life. If you know any woman who lives under the terror of domestic violence, who is afraid to report, who thinks there's no way out, share this video with her immediately. It might be the outstretched hand she needs at this exact moment to find courage. Leave a comment saying where you're watching from and your children's names, so that other women know they're not alone in this struggle. Do it now. Don't wait even one more minute. Your action can save a life today.